Our group did our presentation on the Black War that lasted from 1824 until 1832. What was the Black War? The Black War was a conflict between British colonists and the people of Tasmania. The Australian island of Tasmania, once called Van Diemen's Land, was inhabited by Aboriginals referred to as Palawa. The ensuing period of struggle for power over the land between the natives and British colonists was very bloody and almost resulted in the genocide of the Tasmanian Aboriginals. On the third slide, we have two maps. The first map shows Tasmania into great detail, showing the different parts within the little island. And on the second map, it shows where the island is relating to the country of Australia. And on the fourth slide, it shows where Great Britain is and where Australia and Tasmania is.
The background. The Palawa people were quite an isolated group due to being cut off from the mainland after the Bass Strait, the sea between Australia and Tasmania, flooded. They were a small population of around 4,000 of extremely diverse people with copious amounts of dialects, celebrations, tools, and culture. Below is a map showing the highlighted area that is the Bass Strait, separating the two areas of land. The odds. Palawa technology was not advanced, but they had developed a culturally rich society. The clash between these people and the British was the most intense frontier conflict seen in Australia's history. The two groups were very culturally and technologically dissimilar, however they had the same goal in mind, to survive and win the land they both thought was rightfully theirs. The Palawa people were at a great disadvantage. They had to face guns and more developed weapons to defend their lives and the control of their country. The British no doubt took advantage of this fact. Background content. Britain was a highly successful nation around the time of the Black War. At the time they found the island in 1777, they had heightened tensions with France, which eventually led to the Anglo-French War, also known as the War of 1778, which was a military conflict between France and Great Britain between 1778 and 1783. This only hastened Great Britain to make decisive action about the land of Tasmania and to declare it as their own. How it began. The war was primarily started by the British colonists and their livestock taking over the traditional hunting grounds in Tasmania, as well as the violence the Palawa people endured from the British. The colonists would often torment the Tasmanian people. Armed combat began by the British military shooting the Palawa hunters that were trying to defend their hunting grounds. The colonists, undoubtedly overpowering the Aboriginals, took over their hunting grounds, which hindered the Aboriginals' own means of hunting. This led to them having less food for themselves and becoming more hostile towards the colonists. The British took over the land to increase the number of colonies that they had in Australia and to safeguard the land from their enemy, the French. After going back and forth with the soldiers for a prolonged amount of time, the Palawa began to organize attacks against the colonizers. Situations like these between soldiers of more advanced countries and less advanced Aboriginal or Native people are common in history. It is not very shocking to hear of soldiers taking over land and harming the people they took it from. The overtaking of traditional land was the biggest cause of the Black War.
Harsh realities. The British were cruel and inhumane towards the Tasmanian people. In 1777, they began to turn Tasmania into a settlement for criminals and undesirables that they wanted to expel from their society. This left the island filled with rapists and murderers who would often continue their crimes, this time carrying them out on the indigenous population who could not defend themselves. The Palawa people were tortured for many years and left at the mercy of the British colonial government. The British named their conflicts with the Tasmanian people the Black War of Van Diemen's Land. However, it is clear to anyone who looks at the history that this was not really a war, rather a genocide. Considered the most extensive conflict in Australian history, the Black War was extremely violent. Settlers drove Tasmanian Aborigines from their lands, murdering many. Of course, the violence went both ways. Tasmanian Aborigines also attacked and killed settlers and their families. They raided houses and farms for food and resources and tried to drive out the British, although almost all the actions can be declared as self-defense. The Black Line. It was an offensive operation that was made by Lieutenant Governor George Arthur. It was a human chain that would drive away the Aboriginal people from the land that the British wanted, as well as corral them into the Tasmanian Peninsula where the British could capture and kill the Tasmanian Aboriginals. Approximately 2,000 people formed the Black Line. It was an assortment of soldiers, servants, and civilians/settlers. The operations took a toll on the Britain's monetary and military reserves as it consumed a lot of labor and resources. There were 3 black lines established over 15 months in 1830 and 1831, and although they were not efficient at capturing the remaining Aboriginal people, it succeeded in frightening the natives and inciting their surrender to the colonists. The line moved south over many weeks and attempted to subdue, relocate, and intimidate the Aboriginal people. In the short term, the plan failed. However, it eventually gave Europeans control over the region. In total, there were only 2 recorded instances of Tasmanian Aborigines being captured and 2 deaths. The death toll for the Palawa people is also likely far higher than recorded, as many of their deaths may have been overlooked or covered up by the colonists.
Surrender and removal. George Augustus Robinson, also known as the Conciliator, convinced about 220 Tasmanian Aboriginals to capitulate and guaranteed them protection and support from the government. After that, there were no reports of violence in the settled districts, although in the Northwest, small acts of violence continued until 1842. Martial law and the bounty on Aboriginal people was taken away in 1832. Death toll. The British Empire faced about 219 deaths, whereas 600 to 900 Palawa people were killed during the entire duration of the war. This means that there were approximately 400% more deaths for the Palawa people than for the colonists. This number does not include all the casualties, which can include injuries sustained during the war. The number may seem low, but this is due to the war occurring over a 30-year period when the native people began to fight back. But remember, there could have been many unjust killings and massacres to happen that would technically not be included in the war. Led by the University of Newcastle, there is a research project currently in its 8th year where historian Linda Ryan estimates that more than 10,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander lives were lost in more than 400 massacres. Outcome and effects. The colonists were the victors in the end. No treaty was signed, a British system of law was established, the indigenous people were dispossessed, and their population drastically declined due to the killing, starvation, and forced migration. To this day, it stands to be the largest domestic military event in the history of Australia. Here are our sources.